good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Karim Harbott, and I'm going to be walking you through the 6 enablers of business agility today. Strap yourselves in. We'll be moving pretty quickly. We have 3 high-level topics to cover. The first is the case for business agility itself. We'll be talking through the why of this stuff. The second is the meat, and it's the 6 enablers of business agility. What are they? Why did I choose those 6? And what about all the other stuff that it might seem is missing? I'll be covering that. And finally, how to set your organization up and your transformation up for success, which is a bold statement given the fact that I'm going to give it about 5 minutes at the end. What I'm not going to do is talk you through how to set a transformation up for success. However, I'm going to talk about some high-level tips that I found useful to encapsulate all of those 6 enablers and to hopefully make sure you don't miss anything at a high level. So that's what we're doing, and I'm going to dive straight in. This, of course, is me. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the sort of high level is I've been 12 or 13 years in the Agile space as a Scrum Master for many years in the Kanban space, and more recently in the leadership and organizational transformation space, looking at leadership development, culture, structural change of big, messy organizations. I've seen a lot of mistakes made. I've seen some victories as well, so hopefully be able to share some of those with you as I go. But we start, of course, in the obvious place given this topic, and that is with the woolly mammoth. Well, more broadly, the fact that there were many enormous creatures that used to roam the earth if you go back far enough, way bigger than the creatures we have right now. We have some big ones, we have elephants, we have rhinos. Let's ignore the whales because, well, they're underwater. But I'm talking Diplodocus, Apatosaurus. There were apparently 2-ton wombats that used to lumber around the outback of Australia. Why so big? Where are all these big creatures now? I find these interesting questions. Now, there's a lot of evidence to support the fact that there is a competitive advantage to being big for most species, particularly mammals and reptiles. What is that competitive advantage? Well, you could probably name a lot of them. If you are squaring up against your own species to compete for food or resources, then the bigger and the stronger is more likely to prevail there. If you are trying to fight off a predator, it helps to be big. If you're trying to catch prey, it helps to be big. And you can travel greater distances to find resources. You can store more resources for the lean times. And so when we have a stable environment like we have had for many sort of centuries, but also for tens of thousands of years in the past, there is that competitive advantage, and we do get bigger and bigger and bigger over time through a process of natural selection. Where, then, are these giant creatures? Where is Apatosaurus, Diplodocus? Where is this giant wombat? Now, the interesting thing is, nature has a wonderful counterbalance to stop things getting too big. And those counterbalances come in the form of extinction events, the most famous of which happened 66 million years ago, which is called the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event. And it involved an asteroid slamming into Earth, around about where the Gulf of Mexico is, and setting off a chain of events that led to the elimination of 75% of life on this planet. That's plants and animals, 75% gone. Including the poor old dinosaurs, and there's not a trace of them after that time. And what the evidence shows us in terms of fossils and bones is that the animals that survived that were largely the smaller creatures, about cat-sized and below. In fact, almost nothing over 25 kilograms. That's 55 pounds to our cousins across the Atlantic. 55 pounds, 25 kilograms. Very few things over that weight survived. So what was your competitive advantage during the stable times became a liability when the environment changed dramatically. And it was the smaller creatures that were more able to adapt to that new environment, to be able to forage, to shelter, to find food, even to reproduce. It takes a long time for some creatures to reproduce, and some can do it very quickly. So these were the animals that survived. They adapted to the new environment, and they thrived for the next few thousand years. I find an interesting parallel in business. And I'm going to be walking through that as we look at this case for business agility. I want to talk about two competing activities in organizations. And this is a thread that runs through a lot of the work I do. Exploiting and exploring. Now, when you're exploiting, you are executing against the known, proven, repeatable product, service, or business model. It is operations. It is about efficiency. It's about cost savings. If you think of a pharmaceutical company, this is about just manufacturing, packaging, and distributing, marketing, and selling your product. You already have the drug. You just need to make it in enough quantity and get it out there efficiently. And you want to do that as cheaply as possible. This is where efficiency is your friend and operational excellence is your friend. On the other side, it's exploring. Well, that's creating new products, new services, new business models, things that don't exist yet. It's highly creative. It's very difficult to plan and make forecasts. You're going to fail a lot and you're going to have to learn as you go. The equivalent for our pharmaceutical company is coming up with a new drug. You know, the sort of high-level stats around that, around 25,000 compounds are explored, of which only 25 make it to clinical trials. 5 make it into the market and 1 makes money. Right? So if you're not comfortable with failure, sorry about that, because you're going to fail a lot. So you see the very different types of activities. One is about cost reduction and you want to avoid errors, and one is completely creative and you'll be making loads of errors. Exploring and exploiting. Now, back in the 20th century, early 20th century, end of the 19th, start of the 20th century, exploiting your current products and services with efficiency was your competitive advantage. It's the good old Model T there, made by Ford. And in 1913, an operational innovation known as the moving assembly line transformed their ability to assemble that Model T, which allowed them to create a Model T in 90 minutes as opposed to 12 hours and sell it for $300 as opposed to $850. That is a dramatic reduction in costs, and it allowed them to scale their organization to levels previously unthought of. The analogy now is selling a Tesla Model X for about $30,000. I mean, it's just like, what would the demand be if Elon was able to do that? So they competed, and many of the other organizations at this time competed through operational excellence, through efficiency, through cost savings, and they structured their organizations to do that. That was their competitive advantage. And massive organizations grew off the back of that approach. But that was then, and the world didn't change quite as quickly as it does now. And it can make the Model T for 19 years and do very, very well off that. You can't really make anything for 19 years these days. Why? Because of this little thing called VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. I'm not going to go into this. You probably heard this term more than you ever thought you would hear this term, particularly in the last 18 months. The world is more volatile. That means it changes more quickly than ever before, significantly more quickly, and the pace of change is only increasing. Uncertainty, well, our ability to make predictions has never been lower because we don't know what's coming. The world's changing quickly. There's so much interconnectedness which plays into the complexity of the work we're doing now. So many moving parts, so many markets, so many different geographies with different legal structures, different competitors, different customer segments, different technologies, different cultures, all interacting in ways you cannot even begin to predict the behavior of. And finally, this ambiguity, which is not a lack of information. We have plenty of that. It's the fact that we can draw multiple seemingly valid conclusions. Like, we have all of the dots, we have more dots than we'll ever need, but which dot joins to which dot and which dot is irrelevant is very difficult to get our head around. So back in the 20th centuries, particularly the early part of the 20th century, we had low levels of these things. There wasn't a huge pace of change. There wasn't huge uncertainty. You could forecast 5, 10 years into the future. The work was pretty much understandable. There wasn't a huge complexity and there wasn't huge ambiguity. Fast forward to 2021 and we are in unprecedented times. Now, what's the implication of that? Well, you've probably all seen graphs similar to this. I have to put at least one graph in. It's just the law. All right. I love a good chart. And what this shows is the average tenure on the S&P 500 index, right? So these organizations may continue to exist, but not on the index. They've dropped off it. And you used to be able to, you would expect to be on there for about 61 years once you joined. That was down to 15. The trend is downwards. Why? Because when it is no longer about just executing against what you have, then you need more than just operational excellence and effectiveness. You need more than just efficiency. You need something else in order to survive and thrive in this world of uncertainty. And the way I like to look at this is the stuff on the left, the exploit stuff. We're incredibly good at that. When we study this hard in MBAs, this is tried and tested. Leaders have been doing this for decades. Plenty of tools and techniques around it. On the right, we expect the structures and cultures and policies and approaches that work on the left to work here, and they don't. We need a completely new operating model over here. And most people are not schooled in that. Most people are not trained to deal with uncertainty and the techniques and the tools and the culture change around it. And this is why organizations are surviving for less time than they ever have. And this is why organizations can disappear in a small number of years now, whereas it took years to decline previously. So let's dive into that a little bit. I consider VUCA a 21st century extinction event, because we've gone from a stable business environment where just doing effectively what you've always done is your competitive advantage. If you can work a little bit more efficiently than everyone else and you can drop your prices, then you will win. Stable environment. Suddenly, the game has changed. This increased volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity has meant that we are no longer in a stable business climate, but we have turbulence, which means we need to be able to reinvent ourselves, to create new knowledge, to innovate. And we're just not set up for that, and this is causing problems. A good friend and mentor of mine, Mike Beadle, who we tragically lost a couple of years ago, used to say this all the time. It's easier to grow a unicorn than to transform a dinosaur. I love that quote. How many unicorns spring up each year? Dozens, if not more. How many big traditional organizations suddenly reinvent themselves to be incredibly innovative and adaptive and nimble? Not so many. I can probably count on one hand how many have done that in the past 5 to 10 years. Lots are born that way, but very few transform. So why is it so difficult? What's the challenge here? Well, the way I like to look at this is if you try to install an Android app on an iPhone, why you would want to do that, I don't know. But let's say you really wanted to, it's unlikely to work. It won't work. Like the two things, nothing wrong with the app, nothing wrong with the iPhone. It's a compatibility issue and it's going to fail. Now, what if you try to install new ways of working, new processes, practices, frameworks, tools, technologies on an organization with traditional cultures and structures and policies designed for efficiency, and you're trying to now innovate things like design thinking and Scrum in these big traditional organizations? How's that going to go? Well, it's going to fail as well. We know that. We've probably seen it many, many times over, more times than we ever thought we wanted to see that happen. It will also fail because the underlying organizational operating system has not been put in place. What do I mean by that? I spend a lot of my time, and I certainly have over the last years, teaching these things. That's where I started in the Agile space. I'm a Scrum trainer, teach all of these tools and techniques, large-scale Scrum, whatever, whichever one of these things jumps out at you as your pet framework or approach. It is processes, practices, frameworks, tools, technologies. These are the things we give our focus to. If we could just have better stand-ups, everything will be wonderful. Oh, wait, once we've installed Jira, all of our problems will disappear. Other bug tracking solutions are available. Now, of course, we know that's not true, but what constitutes the underlying organizational operating system in an organization? Let's investigate that, shall we? For me, over the years, I've used many models, some of mine, some of other people's. I've pulled things together, I've sliced and diced, and I've come to this. At a high level, I think you need to address these 6 things. I call this the 6 enablers of business agility, and it's shaped pretty much all of my training and consulting for the last 5 to 7 years. If you don't address all of these, you're going to struggle in your organization. So create the underlying organizational operating system, and then you can install those ways of working, these design thinking approaches, Scrum, Kanban, Less, Safe, whatever it is that you enjoy, then you're going to have a chance of succeeding. So for the rest of this talk now, I'm going to run you through those at a super high level and give you a flavor of why these things are important. So we'll start with leadership and management, and I start here deliberately. I start here because everything starts with the mindset and the behaviors and the ways that leaders show up. If they don't change that, nothing else is going to happen because they are creating that environment. Okay, so we know what we don't want, like more command and control, micromanagement, the positional authority, the focusing on work tasks. We want to move away from that. And we want to move towards focusing on articulating that inspiring vision and empowering others to make that a reality. Investing in the growth of those around you, because you're only as successful as the people around you, and in decentralizing decision making to where the information is for faster and better decisions within guardrails, of course, and there are many techniques for doing that. But we need to know exactly what we're trying to achieve. We need to know exactly why it's important, and then leaders can get out of the way and let these talented people do their thing. It's a very different style of management, whether it's catalyst leadership, intent-based leadership, servant leadership. There are many models out there to deal with the uncertainty that we see. But we need to change as leaders how we show up and how we operate. We need to go on a journey. First things first. Next up is this thing that we know is always a blocker. If you see the version 1 State of Agile report, almost every year, organizational culture at odds with Agile values and principles comes up as certainly either number 1 or 2 impediment to greater agility. We know this, right? We have cultures of conformance, of fear, of secrecy, of blame, of control. None of these things are helpful when you're doing creative work, innovative work, and you're trying to build things and deliver value to your customer. We need to move away from that to one of experimentation, of collaboration, cooperation, openness, trust, transparency, psychological safety. We need to create that safety for people to experiment, to feel like it's okay to make mistakes, to have crazy ideas, to ask for help, right? We know how important that is, but it comes from the behaviors of leaders. It comes from the structures, policies, incentives, and metrics that they put in place, and in how they show up again has a massive influence on the behavior of people, which is where your culture comes from. So if we don't address this, again, we're going to really struggle to see an impact. Next is our organizational structure. Think about an oil tanker and think about a speedboat. Right? Which one is going to be more nimble? Right? We know the answer to this. One is designed to be nimble. One is designed to be very efficient at going in a straight line. And if you want to go in a straight line and you know you're pointing in the right direction, don't waste your time with a speedboat. Right? It's just going to burn a whole lot more fuel than you need to. Go with the oil tanker. Right? However, if we don't know the direction we're going in, then we need to be designed to be nimble. All right, so these top-down hierarchies that keep people in these functional silos and prevent cooperation, collaboration, and communication. And then these external coordinators who try to do that on behalf of everybody else. Right? It just becomes coordination chaos. Let's move away from that and this focus on individual productivity, the production line mentality. It worked incredibly well for Henry Ford in 1913. Not so much for everybody else when we are trying to create new knowledge. And we need to move towards the customer-focused, cross-functional, autonomous team. In fact, networks of interconnected self-managing teams. Right? all collaborating and cooperating with each other with a shared common goal and high trust across those teams. We need to invest in that, right? But it all comes from that customer focus and knowing what we're trying to deliver and for whom and why this is important. And then, of course, moving towards becoming an ambidextrous organization with the adaptive side of the organization and the efficient side of the organization, the exploit and the explore side. We need different structures to achieve different outcomes. So that is structure. People engagement, right, which feels like it should have been higher, right? But what do you take away from the first few there? The leadership or the culture, but people, right? Everything is about people. We know the first value in the manifesto for Agile software development is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We need to move away from this bureaucracy, this compliance, these rules, these rigid processes and prescribed tools which disempower people systematically. You know, whichever survey you care to look at, we have record low levels of employee engagement. People are bored. People are disempowered. They have no autonomy. They don't walk to work with a spring in their step. And I think everyone has the right to do that, to feel like they are contributing and to be engaged in what they do, to be passionate about what they do. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And we need to move towards high trust, high freedom, right? Within bounds, of course, recognition, gratitude, people growing to become the best they can be, and of course, all aligned with shared values and a shared purpose. Right? This is how we get the best out of 21st century knowledge workers, and this is how we get the best out of people. Right? Create these organizations that are not only fit for the 21st century, fit for innovation, but fit for human beings as well. Okay, so HR needs to come along for the ride, and I so rarely see HR directors engaged in this process, but it's vital. Governance and funding. This one raises eyebrows sometimes, but governance and funding, why is that one there? What is it about that? Right, well, I'll tell you what it is about that. If you have annual budgets, if you have upfront business cases, fixed scope, fixed deadline deliveries, you know, that's the number one question I get in my Scrum classes is, but what if we've got a fixed scope, fixed date delivery? How can we be agile? Well, what you're asking there is how you can respond to change and not respond to change at the same time, and I'll let you work out whether that's possible. All right, predefined outputs. All right, so what if we deliver these outputs? Are we going to get the outcomes we want? Right, so we bake this into our organizations with our governance policies and our business cases, and we sign off all of this work and we say, off you go, do that thing. What we need are multiple safe-to-fail experiments. Right, remember, 25,000 compounds investigated when we are searching for new drugs, just to get 25 clinical trials. Right, so we need small, cheap, it says safe to fail, quick and cheap to fail experiments. So we test lots of things, we throw out the things that don't work, we double down on the things that do. But for that, we need adaptive plans. We need a venture capital type funding model where we fund lots of things a little bit and then we double down on those things that show promise, just like VCs have been doing for decades. And we need to focus less on outputs and more on outcomes, less on projects and more on products and value streams to our organizations and value to our customer. Okay, so reinventing this, again, finance and HR, I leave to the end, almost, because it's so rare that we see those, but without that, everything else just grinds to a halt because you are constrained. It's like the theory of constraints at your organization. You're only effective as your weakest enabler. And ways of working, and I'm not going to give this much time because these are the processes, practices, frameworks, tools, whether you're practicing design thinking, lean startup, Scrum, Kanban, whatever it is for you in your context that works. We need to move away from rigid processes and prescription and excess documentation and standardization and insistence everyone does it the same way towards all those things that you can see there. You know all of those. This is the stuff we hear every single day in all of the Agile talks and all of the Agile classes. So this is the one we tend to give almost all of the attention in a transformation endeavor, right? But it's one of 6 things, and I think this is why we have so many shallow and unsuccessful Agile adoptions, actually, because you can't do it in isolation. You're installing the Android app on the iPhone at this point. Don't do that. Now, how do I ensure that there is coherence here, right? And I kind of want to squeeze this in. This is not talk about transformation as such. It's more a talk to help you understand the areas we need to touch on. But I found this an interesting tool. It's called the Business Agility Canvas, and I designed it to cover all 6 of these enablers because what I was seeing is A, many of those enablers were missed, and B, a lot of the changes made across the organization were not coherent. They were not aligned, they were not coordinated, and they were not moving towards a common goal and a why and a vision. Right? And so we need to ensure that they are, and I've borrowed heavily here from Kotter's work and from V2 MOM, vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures that was used at Salesforce. I've, of course, borrowed from Alex Osterwalder's business model canvas. That was the main inspiration for this. But right, why did he create that? So that you could see how all elements of a business model interact with each other. Why did I create this? So we can see how all elements of the change in our organization map together and work together towards a common goal. Right? It's exactly the same idea. Why reinvent the wheel? Okay, so this is what my canvas looks like. We all have to have a canvas now, right? This is mine. And I start at the top. This is the what and the why. What's the vision here? What are our values? Like, what are we trying to achieve? You know, we should start with why. Simon Sinek told us that a long time ago. We should start with why because people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. What are our values? What do we value as an organization? What's our success criteria? Dare I say it? We should probably have something measurable so that we know whether we've moved in the right direction or the wrong direction. Okay, so start there. Otherwise, what are we trying to achieve? Right, then we have the how. Now, the how is, of course, what changes are we making across the organization? And I've just walked through those 6 enablers, but the key here isn't to go over them again. The key here is to draw lines from one to the other. If we want to practice design thinking, we need some engineering folk and some business folk and some design folk to interact with customers. That's an organizational structure change. They need to experiment. Well, that's a culture change. We need to fund them differently. That's a governance change. We need to reward them differently. Maybe move towards an outcome-based rewards instead of individual incentives. That's an HR change, you see, and all of these things will lead to a cultural change, which is why that sits across the top. You can see how everything hangs together, and of course, if you have any of those things empty, that's not good, and you need to address that, all right? And finally, what else? Because I couldn't think of a better name for this bottom line, so I'm calling it what else until somebody suggests something better. Who do we need to bring along for the ride? Key partners and stakeholders, both internal and external. Who's going to support us? Right? Key risks, what could go wrong? Key obstacles, what's already in the way that we need leaders to remove for us? All right, so as you can see, if we're changing culture, leadership structures, and all of these enablers, that's not driven from bottom up. The bottom up support's fantastic. We should have it. We should nurture it. But without top-down leadership and driving of this change, I've just almost never seen this work. In fact, I have never seen it work because all of these things need to be changed. By the most senior leaders in the organization. It's incredibly difficult. Removing those obstacles is absolutely vital. And that brings our whistle-stop tour to an end. So what did we cover? Well, we covered business agility, why it's important, and why to survive and thrive in today's world, we need to not only be able to do efficiently what we do, but we need to be able to innovate. Do new things, create new knowledge and new value for our customers because every product, every service, every business model has a shelf life. Okay? And it might be shorter than you think, certainly shorter than you want. The second thing we talked about was in order to achieve business agility, become a more nimble, adaptive, innovative organization, you need to touch on all of those enablers, not just one or two. It needs to be a holistic approach that doesn't ignore any of those areas. Otherwise, you're going to get that shallow transformation where some people call that doing Agile rather than being Agile. You won't achieve any actual agility. And finally, you need a consistent, coherent, coordinated approach that is driven by leaders. And the Business Agility Canvas is one way of doing that. By the way, you can find details on how to download that for free. There's a 20-page guidebook. I'd recommend you check that out. Go to 6enablers.com and you'll find a whole bunch of resources there. Speaking of resources, I have a little self-assessment which is also free. I just want people to use these things, so check that out, 6enablers.com. You will find that as well under the resources section. It's just 3 short questions for each of these enablers. That's 18 questions in all, because did that maths instantly there. 6 times 3 must have had my caffeine today. And you can see how you're doing in each of those areas. If you want to go deeper, a couple of ways you can go deeper. I do on a certified Agile leadership class where I go super deep into this, this 30 minutes becomes a whole 2-day class, or you could just take this option here, which is the book that was out just a month ago now, The 6 Enablers of Business Agility. So put my heart and soul into that. Hopefully some people will find it valuable, and you can go and explore some of those enablers. And that is everything I wanted to say, and I think that was just about half an hour. So thank you so much for giving me half an hour of your life. I appreciate that. I know there's a lot of other things you could have been doing with that, and so much appreciated. I hope some of that was valuable to you, and I really look forward to continuing this conversation.